The following video will explain the fundamentals of saw installation and setup of your saw. If you have any questions, please contact HE&M Saw at 918-825-4821. Read the saw manual's safety section before installing and operating the saw. Common sense, along with the safety warnings associated with installation of your saw, will help prevent injury. Always read and pay full attention to all safety instructions and warnings, and be certain anyone operating the saw or any of its features and options has complete awareness of how to operate it properly and has read and understands all safety instructions. The installation of the air saw is not a difficult task. Thorough planning for its location will ease the job. Items to consider include electrical and airline routing as well as loading and unloading of materials. The location of the saw should allow sufficient room for easy handling of long pieces of material. The saw will arrive with a sheet of plastic over it, wrapped in plastic wrap. The saw can be moved with a forklift by placing the forks under the saw. Make sure to not catch any cords or hoses when placing the forks under the saw. The saw can also be moved using a forklift, sliding the forks into the slots inside the two large gray shipping brackets on the saw. However, not all forklift forks will fit. The saw will arrive with a sheet of plastic over it, wrapped in plastic wrap. Remove the plastic wrap and plastic sheet from the saw. Be careful to not cut any wires, hoses, or hit the console when unwrapping if you're using a razor or knife to cut away the plastic. After they are unwrapped, inspect the saw for any damage that may have occurred in shipping. Touch-up paint is provided for any minor scratches. Inside the bottom of the saw will be the saw's splash shields with 4 braces and the coolant pan. Remove these items from the saw base. The accessories and spare parts kit are in the brown box that will either be secured inside a saw vise or may have also shipped in the bottom of the saw. These consist of a checklist sheet, customer's copy of the saw schematics, coolant pump, touch-up paint, wire ties, extra fuses, lockout key, and a bag of nuts and bolts, and the guide cap Allen wrench. Remove the shipping brackets that lock the saw arm and console in place and secures the saw for shipping. The shipping brackets consist of 4 large red-tipped bolts that lift the carriage off of the bearings, 2 large gray brackets that go through the saw, 2 red brackets on the side of the saw, 2 red brackets that attach the counterweight to the saw base, and a bracket that attaches the console to the saw if the console is a swing-away console. Use 2 people to remove the large gray brackets from underneath the saw to prevent damage to the saw during their removal. Keep the shipping brackets and bolts in a safe place in case the saw ever needs to be moved to another location. Before leveling the saw, it is recommended to go ahead and slide the coolant pan underneath the saw so that the saw will not be leveled without enough room for the coolant pan. The deeper end of the coolant pan will go toward the back of the saw, aligning underneath the square hole in the base of the saw. The saw may need to be raised by adjusting the foot pads if the coolant pan will not fit under the saw. Now the saw is ready to be leveled. The saw base uses 4 foot pads to support the machine, which comes shipped mounted on the saw base. All leveling is done by adjusting the 4 foot pads. The saw should be carefully leveled using a precision level which is placed on the saw vise way cutting block to level the saw. The saw should be leveled side to side and front to back to ensure accurate cutting. Leveling is accomplished by adjusting the jacking screws on each corner of the saw base. The remaining screws and jam nuts are used to lock the foot pads in place. Connect shop supply air pressure to the saw using a quick disconnect. The filter regulator mounted on the saw should be set for 100 pounds per square inch. Only a certified electrician should connect the saw to the main electrical source. Three-phase power is connected to the HE&M saw by connecting the 3 leads to the screws on the top of the disconnect box. Check for proper blade rotation by running the saw motor and noting the direction the blade moves. The blade should move downward. If the rotation is not correct, the 2 phases will need to be switched in the wiring by a certified electrician. Be sure that plant supply voltage matches that of the machine. If the supply voltage and that of the machine do not match, damage to the motor, transformer, or other electrical components can occur. The saw is shipped to set up for 440 volts unless otherwise noted, and is stickered for the type of voltage the saw requires. If any changes are required, they should be made by a competent certified electrician. A second set of the saw's wiring schematics is kept inside the control panel box. This set of prints is referred to as the service tech's copy and will need to remain in the control panel box. Also inside the control panel box is where the reset button is found. If the saw does not power up when turned on from the console, or the panel appears to have power but the motor won't start, try hitting the reset button several times and then try powering up the saw again. Side wings are placed on the sides of the saw to return the coolant to the coolant pump and to work as splash guards. Each side has 2 wings or plates and 2 braces that will need to be installed. To install, align the holes in the braces to the marked holes that are on the ledges on the side of the saw base pan. One hole will be on the ledge of the pan near the front of the saw, and the other is located on the pan ledge near the middle of the saw. Then screw the bolt through the bottom of the ledge and through the brace. After the braces are in place, the plate without the lip will be placed on the front end of the saw over the braces with the screws going through the pre-drilled holes on the plate. Place the nuts over the screws and then tightly bolt the plate to the braces and ledge of the saw. The other plate that has the lip will be hung on the back end of the saw over the ledge, with the lip on one side of the plate hung over the other plate. This plate will not be bolted down, allowing it to easily be removed if needed for maintenance. Repeat this process to install the wings for the other side of the saw. Be sure that the on-off valve is closed on the coolant washdown hose before setting up the coolant pump. Otherwise, unwanted coolant will flow out of the washdown hose nozzle when the pump is started. Also be sure that the flex tube nozzles on the saw arm are turned downward to keep coolant from spraying up into the air when started. Press the coolant pump filter onto the inlet area of the coolant pump and attach the coolant hose that is coming out from the bottom of the saw to the coolant pump by press-fitting it onto the pump outlet tube. Set the coolant pump into the coolant pan. Then bring the power cord up through the slot side of the saw and plug the cord into the outlet on the saw. Add water and cutting fluid to the product's recommended mixture ratio. The saw installation is now complete.